Hello there. How many folks here presently revitalize communities or restore nature for a living? How many would like to? All right, excellent. I've got 4 messages for you here. 4 big messages, unfortunately, because we're running a bit behind time. So I'm going to be talking like a madman, and I've got a bunch of slides. They're going to be going by like crazy. You blink, you lose. First message, sustainable development is at least 200 years too late. Second message, we and future generations can make our world healthier, wealthier, and more beautiful for a living. Third message, the process of restoring our planet, revitalizing our communities, is finally becoming a rigorous discipline with the proper tools, the proper education. Lastly, restoring our world can help restore peace. You know, final speaker can never get away without mentioning world peace. Exactly 100 years ago, Teddy Roosevelt said this. Now, until you get to that word increased, it sounds like he was just making the usual call for, let's be better stewards of the environment, let's leave something for the kids. But that's not what he said, is it? He said increased. He's talking about each generation leaving the world healthier, wealthier, more beautiful than it was when they inherited, and that's a totally different proposition. Leaving something for the kids is great. Not doing as much damage is great. But it's not the same as restoring existing damage or leaving more than you inherited. So here we are 100 years later. And, 100 years ago, the leader of the free world said we need a restoration economy. So what happened? Here we are, grossly depleted, polluted, degraded. Well, timing is everything. And we've now got, I think, a sufficient critical mass of crises to motivate us. And we've got a fair number of crises to deal with because this is the mode we've been in for 5,000 years. Ever since we started creating permanent communities, our basis of wealth creation has been developing raw land and extracting depleting virgin resources. There's nothing wrong with that. Sprawl is not evil. Extracting resources is not evil. Nature does it. But when you're on a finite planet and your population is growing 1 billion people every 15 years, there does come a point when that's no longer appropriate. We've had 5,000 years of what I call dewealth, which is wealth creation based on developing raw land and depleting natural resources. And much of the world now looks like this. We can have, coming into 5,000 years of reWealth, which is wealth creation based on redeveloping the places we've already developed and on repairing and replenishing the natural resources that we damaged along the way. This is a former mining site. This is Bouchard Gardens on Vancouver Island. When the husband died and the mine was closed down, his wife decided she didn't want to leave this ugly scar on the face of the earth. So she discovered that in this pit, it created a microclimate where all kinds of things could grow. She turned it into a botanical garden. It's now one of the largest and most successful private employers on all of Vancouver Island. That's making a horrendous situation healthier, wealthier, and more beautiful for a living. So after 5,000 years of dewealth, every time we turn around, we're seeing some crisis that can be directly traced to wealth creation based on development and depletion. But if we also look for the good, we'll find projects like this, huge projects, multi-billion-dollar projects to restore nature. I mean, these folks aren't just planting a tree farm, they're planting native forest. A tree farm isn't any more a forest than a field of corn is. Here's a map of the Pacific Northwest. Every single one of those colored dots is a restoration project. And these are just natural restoration projects, fishery restoration, watershed restoration, ecosystem restoration. It doesn't include infrastructure renewal, historic building restoration, brownfields cleanup. So we're surrounded by restoration now. The time is here. The time has come. It's huge. About $2 trillion a year of restoration and redevelopment taking place on the planet right now. It means we're finally getting our priorities straight. We've been, for the last 30 years or so, since the whole green dialogue has gotten really strong, we're still talking in terms of reducing the amount of damage we do, reducing the amount of stuff we consume. That's great, that's good, but it's not enough. The world is just too damaged. We're basically, when we're greening up these old ways of doing things, we're basically just creating a healthier form of cancer instead of curing the cancer. I see housing developments going up on top of family farms and endangered ecosystems, and the developer will slap some photovoltaic panels on the roof and call it sustainable or green. Like I said, just another greener form of cancer. Who needs to sustain places like this? Conservation is not an appropriate mode of action in a place like this that's been this aggressively damaged by human activity. The only appropriate mode of action here is restoration. Here's what it looks like in a graph. For 5,000 years, this vertical axis here is increasing wealth. The horizontal axis is decreasing resources. For 5,000 years, we've been on this trajectory here, this dewealth trajectory, where we've been getting richer, but our resource bases have been getting smaller. We're now at a critical point where a number of global crises are hitting us simultaneously, and we have to make a decision. Do we stay in dewealth mode? If we do, both our economy and our resource base will go into long-term decline. Or do we switch into rewealth mode, basing our economic growth on restoring, redeveloping, revitalizing? In that case, both our economy and our resource base can go into a long-term upward trajectory. The great thing about this is you can't do too much rewealth. You can do it badly, but if you're doing it well, you can't do too much. I've been doing this now full-time for a decade. From Jerusalem to Vancouver to Denmark, and I have never heard a community say, "Oh my God, we got to put the brakes on this revitalization program. Our way of life is going through the roof. The quality of life," or they don't say, "We got to slow down this river restoration program. Look how clean the water's getting, and there are way too many fish in there now," or "Oh my God, we got to stop this brownfields remediation and redevelopment program. We're running out of contaminated sites." You just don't hear stuff like that. You can't do too much restoration and revitalization. Chesapeake Bay Foundation, right here, has these great oyster boats that go out and plant new oyster reefs, which help clean up the water. But what I really love is this program they've got in the Baltimore inner city schools, where the kids plant native seagrasses in the classroom during the winter. And in the spring, they go out and plant them in dead areas of the bay. Now, imagine what this is like for a 10-year-old. They go out to this ugly, desolate mud flat. There's no life. They put this stuff in the ground. They come back a year later, and it's all green and flowers and herons and striped bass and horseshoe crabs and blue crabs. And they look at that and they say, "I did that. I brought the world back to life." What kind of impression is that going to make on their minds? What's it going to do to their expectations of what they're going to do for a living and the impact their career is going to have on the world? If you've never actually gotten out there, gotten your hands muddy on one of these ecological restoration projects, let me tell you, it's one of the most therapeutic things you'll ever do. And when we restore the world, it restores us. Now, I got to admit, I'm spoiled. This is a photo of me back in 1973. When I was a medic on a Green Beret scuba team. That was back when I had a six-pack instead of a keg. And the Army paid me to scuba dive. They paid me to jump out of airplanes. They paid me to cross-country ski, infiltration technique. They paid me to learn jungle survival. They paid me to learn medicine. They paid me to learn desert survival. When I got out of the Army, I was ruined. I totally expected that the natural thing to do is earn your living doing stuff that's fun, this kind of stuff that you would normally pay to do. So for the rest of my life, I've spent it trying to do things that really turn me on. And bringing places back to life, or helping places come back to life, really turns me on. You never get tired of it. Here's a buddy of mine, Keith Bowers, right up here in Baltimore. Straight out of landscape architecture school, he started a company that restores the world for a living called Biohabitats, and that's a design company, and he also started a contracting company to go along with it. And he was given a contract to restore 2 miles of this spring, it was called Spring Branch. And it used to be a beautiful, winding, babbling, beautiful creek. And it got re-engineered according to a very popular public policy known as FSE. It stands for Flood Someone Else. The idea here is that you straighten out the creek to get the stormwaters out of town as quickly as possible, and then you wrap it in concrete to make sure none of the water gets absorbed into the ground, so the flood for the next community down the line is twice as bad as it would have been. So he was given a contract to restore this. This is what it looked like about 9 months into the process after he had restored what's called the fluvial dynamics. This is what it looked like about 2 years into the process after he had restored the native vegetation. That's what it looks like today. Now, that's about as close to doing magic for a living as I know of. And he's not doing that as a volunteer. I mean, he's got 9 offices around the country now, over 100 employees, doing about $12 million a year. Yeah, he's restoring the world for a living. The fact is, we've got this wealth, this huge inventory of restorable assets that the unenlightened call problems. They look around their communities, they see the contaminated sites, vacant lots, derelict buildings, and they say, oh my God, if only we didn't have that, we could revitalize. No, those are your ingredients of revitalization. That's what you have to work with. That's how you revitalize. In my first book, The Restoration Economy, I listed the different categories of restorable assets, the ingredients of revitalization. And they're basically come in 3 flavors. You got the natural assets, ecosystem restoration, watershed restoration, all of that. You got built assets, restorable assets, your infrastructure, your brownfields, your historic buildings. Then you got socioeconomic assets, community services, education. These are all the ingredients of revitalization. The problem is that these assets tend to be managed in silos. The historic people don't talk to the ecosystem people, who don't talk to the infrastructure people. And then on top of all that, you've got disciplinary silos. The architects don't like the engineers. The planners don't trust the developers. Nobody trusts the politicians. And, it's really hard to revitalize a place under those circumstances because human communities are complex, living, adaptive systems. They can't be treated like automobile engines where you just yank out a starter motor and slap in a new one. It's got to work as a holistic system. So as a result of all these silos, what happens is you get a lot of communities who do a lot of great projects, all kinds of beautiful historic restorations and renewal projects all over the place, but they don't ever hit that critical point I refer to as critical renewal. It's that tipping point where revitalization starts feeding on itself, revitalization begets revitalization, it becomes the hot place, it just attracts money and everything else. One of the big problems here is that we tend to default to not collaborating well with each other whenever we can get away with it. And another problem is that unlike Otis this morning, who is the kind of planner you really want to work with, planners, especially over the last 50 years or so, have tended to treat community stakeholders and citizens like slinkies. They got not good for much, but they sure put a smile on your face when you push them down the stairs. But there is a new breed of planners coming out now that listens and collaborates, but there's still a problem here, is that this is how most communities revitalize. They'll throw a bunch of experts in a room, do a bunch of stuff, and then hope that somehow magically revitalization will kick in. And for something that's so critically important to the future of a community, don't you think there'd be a little more rigor? Some underlying principles maybe, an underlying theory, some underlying models. You don't get any of that. At the most, sometimes they'll copy what some other city did, but they're seldom smart enough to copy the process. They just copy the product. They say, oh, if we just get an aquarium, we'll come back to life too, just like they did. It's the consumer approach to revitalization. We just buy something and we'll get revitalized. I'm reading a book right now called Connected, and it's got this great set of graphics here showing a group of people that with no purpose and no organization, and then 3 other groups of people who are organized according to different functions, showing that a group of people can double, triple, quadruple their output if they're just organized correctly for the kind of function you want them to perform. And that's what's happened in communities that have come back from the dead. Anybody know where this is? Yeah, there we go. Chattanooga, Tennessee. Back in the 70s, Walter Cronkite said it's the filthiest city in the United States, and that was the least of their problems. This is a dying city. But they got it together. They learned how to connect all their resources, all their people in such a way that they are now a poster child of revitalization. They created what I call a renewal engine. It's a kind of community organization and technology in a way that connects communities in a way that launches the revitalization and perpetuates it so that even if you don't have a charismatic leader, even if you have change of political administrations, even if state or federal funding disappears, your revitalization keeps on going. Anybody know where this is? Yeah. You're thinking Frank Gehry, like whoever said LA, and it's an understandable mistake, and it is very similar to Disney, but this is Frank Gehry's first project in Bilbao. And Bilbao was, back when the EU was first created, one of the first things they did was some reports on cities, and their report on Bilbao said this is a city with no future. Bilbao is now a poster child of revitalization. How did they do it? They invented the world's second renewal engine. What's really exciting, because these folks had to invent all this stuff from scratch. It was a long, hard, difficult process. Here's something that's really exciting now. This rural county in Ontario is creating the world's first online revitalization engine using social media and other new software tools. They're creating all the functions of a renewal engine online, quickly, easily, so they engage all their stakeholders. They integrate the renewal of their natural and built and socioeconomic environments. And this rural Ohio county is doing the same thing right now. So finally, we're getting the technologies we need to make this stuff happen quickly, easily, and without a whole lot of money. We've also got metrics now. Just like individuals have IQs, now communities have RQs, renewal quotients, that measure their capacity for renewal. If you Google RQ quiz, you can take a quick, take maybe 5 minutes to take the quiz. It'll give you a score for your community, anywhere from -500 to +1,000. Renew Canada magazine, probably the world's greatest revitalization magazine. I suggest you subscribe to it, even if you're not interested in Canada. Came out just a couple of days ago, this week, came out with the first annual Places to Invest report for Canada. And the way they chose the communities that won the best places to invest was by measuring their RQ. This is going to be spreading all over. In the US and other countries and regions all around the world, we'll soon publish these annual Places to Invest report that measure a community's renewal capacity. What's really exciting about that is that just in the process of competing, communities will be doing all the things they really need to do to bring themselves back to life. This company was started by a buddy of mine named Todd Latham. He, too, is now restoring the world for a living and having a blast doing it. Let me finish with a message about the kids. In case you haven't noticed, we've got a frightening world out there. Just about everything seems to be threatening us these days. And that's scary enough without sending them out with outmoded skills. But the fact is that most of our education these days is still based on the old world of DeWealth. Civil engineers are still graduating from college, having learned how to build dams, drain swamps, and straighten rivers. And they get out in their job, and they find out that all the jobs are tearing down the dams, refilling the swamps, and unstraightening the rivers. And it's a totally different skill set. Fortunately, there are schools that are working on getting a reWealth mindset going. In fact, the first certification for revitalization professionals is now on the way. Up till now, cities have had to basically buy a pig in a poke. They have no idea whether the person they're hiring to run the revitalization program is even qualified. That's being rounded up by the Revitalization Institute, a nonprofit at revitalization.org. And there are about half a dozen universities, including MIT, who you've heard them mentioned quite a few times today, who are taking the lead on this. So, to wrap up, to tap this $100 trillion global inventory of restorable assets, all you need to do is shift your prefix from development to redevelopment, from demolition to reuse, from depletion to replenishment, from degradation to restoration, from decline to revitalization, which basically means that we're moving from a de-economy to a re-economy. Are there any degenerates in here? Raise your hand, please. Not as many as I would have thought. By degenerate, I'm talking about people who earn their living from degenerative activities that are damaging the world, as opposed to regenerates who earn their living from reWealth. Here's a regenerate I've worked with, Governor Brian Schweitzer of Montana. I helped him start his Montana Restoration Economy Initiative back in 2006. Last year, he issued his first report, showed for every $1 million they put into restoring Montana, they get back over $2.5 million of related economic activities. And, boy, can I talk any faster? And generate over 31 high-quality jobs. So, sustainable development is what we should have been doing for the last 5,000 years. We didn't, so now what we need is restorative development. Because if we make our landscape and our communities dysfunctional, they make us dysfunctional. In case you haven't looked around, things are getting kind of dysfunctional socially these days. But if we restore our landscape and our communities, they restore us. And world peace. This map of where India joins Pakistan up there in the yellow line, the Indians had destroyed almost all their mangroves along their coast. Pakistanis had a conservation plan for their mangroves, so the fishing was really great on the Pakistani side, and it was lousy on the Indian side, so the Indians were starting to slip over onto the Pakistani side to fish at night. Pakistanis didn't like that. They started coming out with guns, and you're about to get regional warfare there. Somebody had the bright idea, hey, what about if we restore all the mangroves on the Indian side and bring back the fisheries? And they solved the war problem. We've got a whole planet full of impending resource wars here. If we restore the resources, that should put a real damper on resource wars. Let me close with this benediction from the Bishop of London. I can't say it any better than he did. We talk of sustainable development and sustainable economies, but it's time to move on to restorative development and restorative economies. So let's restore the world together. Thank you.